All right, well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. This is our second installment of our Getting Started training for advanced users with Schoology. Welcome back. Again, my name's Sarah. I'm excited to be kind of working with you offline. I know we're not going to have much time to meet together. Things are pretty hectic, I'm sure, at the school getting started, always a busy time of year. So we're recording the sessions for you all to listen to in your own time whenever it makes sense. For the most part, I'm hoping that a lot of this is going to be sort of best practice review for what all of you have already figured out for this first session. This is going to be covering just our second part of the agenda today. We're going to work through this pretty quickly. It'll be a little bit shorter than the last session. And I will cover some of the advanced features that you might not have seen that I find really helpful. And then the second section is going to be really jumping into the grading piece. So I'll record that separately so you can listen to them separately in your own time. And I definitely recommend that you work through that slowly. And then please do give questions my way. So yesterday, I'm going to jump into the Schoology platform over here. Yesterday, or rather the last time that you listened to this, we already went into our training course together. So once more, if you have not yet joined that course, go ahead and hit pause on the video now and enter that access code directly into your courses. And this is where I'm going to continue building out some materials for today. So we are still in the same course. I'll walk you through a few different other pieces. We're going to start off with the interactive and graded items that we didn't get to last time. And I'm going to show you a couple kind of higher level features that you may not have realized that you could do on the Schoology platform. I'm going to just skip over the grading piece, but I will show you the scoring student work piece. I find that really awesome and helpful to just know all of your tools that are available for use there. And then I'll walk through those advanced features. So to start off with, I'm going to go ahead and create a discussion. So again, remember, I've been building out in this first folder. I'm going to use that green dotted line once more, and I'm actually going to make this discussion the very first thing that my students see. So I'll select Add Discussion from that drop-down menu. And I'm going to go ahead and name this something like Introductory Discussion. So this could be something like an icebreaker of some kind. Maybe at the beginning of the year, I'm trying to get my students really engaged in the Schoology platform, especially if they are kind of learning to be more comfortable with the platform itself. This is a great way to get them to jump in a fairly low stakes environment. So I'm really just getting them to kind of chat to each other and start sharing information and become really engaged in their learning community here. So perhaps I'm going to write respond to the discussion with an answer to each of the following prompts. And then the first thing is going to be, what's your preferred name? So we'll get that nickname thing out of the way. And then maybe what is or what was one highlight of your summer vacation? Probably seems a long way ago now. And what is one thing you're excited about this school year? So all of those are just pretty quick responses. Just as an alternative, you could think of this as a much more academic version as well. So this is really more of kind of that social piece, trying to get students collaborating on the platform. But if you wanted to, you could definitely make this something like, read chapter 15, and then the discussion prompts could be something like, what is one example of the student or the protagonist growing up or transitioning, or what is one example of pathos in this speech, and show me a textual example, pick out a piece of textual evidence, that kind of thing. In which case, it's obviously a little bit higher stakes. It's going to be a bit more academic. You are going to be grading it more for correct answers and accuracy, rather than just completion like you would be doing here. So I'll show you a couple options of how to make that work. And don't forget that within the discussion space, you do still have the rich text editor at your disposal. So I just used really simple type with bullet points, but you could go ahead and insert media. So I see a lot of people doing, a YouTube video of some kind or something sort of interesting and inspiring that they've posted up here. And then they say, watch the video and respond with your thoughts, or what do you think is a growth area, or what's one issue you have with this, that kind of thing. For math teachers or any science equation pieces that you need to build out, you do also have your equation area here. So discussions are awesome for, what do you see as an easier way to build out this equation, or show your working of how you would respond to this answer, that kind of thing. And then again, you do have the option to go in and add a file, a link, pull in from your resources, and then very awesomely, the video audio recording. So this is fantastic if you do have students that need this to be translated, or if you need just that kind of read out discussion prompt for that differentiation piece. Definitely do feel free to use that audio video recording. Always really helpful. I'm going to go ahead and set this with a due date. I'll make it due next week. The reason I want to do that is so that it does show up on my students' workload planner. So I definitely want it to be in their kind of upcoming work feed. It's going to show up on their calendar itself. And then on the right-hand side of any of the pages that they're visiting, it will also show that they have this piece of work that's due. So there's no way that they're going to forget it, because there will be a little reminder for them on the right-hand side. And then I'll go ahead and select enable grading for this scenario. So I do want to grade this, even if it's a discussion like this, perhaps I'm just grading for participation. So under my categories, I'm going to need to pick a category. My understanding is that you already have your categories all set up, and one of them is participation and effort. So you would go ahead and include this sort of thing under that. And then that next step down is going to be your scale or your rubric. And these are two options. I will talk a bit more about rubrics in that second section, but you do have the option to either attach it over to your numeric scale, to the A through F scale, or your own scales that have been pushed out from the school side. So I know that in the system administration piece that they have already created some awesome scales for you. So you can jump in here and you can actually choose that specific scale. I believe it's called Yes Prep official scale, that kind of thing. So you can go ahead and select that scale if it's how you're grading, or perhaps there's a scenario where you're not necessarily using that scale itself. Then your options underneath, this is where it gets pretty exciting. The options piece, my favorite, well, two favorite things that I have down here is that this first icon is your option to individually assign. So let's say you do want to have this discussion going on with your class, but maybe you have, 30 students in your class like I did, and you might want to make it slightly more sort of drilled down to a specific group of people so that they can really comment on one another's. And so in that scenario, I might choose to assign this to a specific grading group. Now, I would need to have created that grading group previously, but once I do, I can just go ahead and type in that kind of thing, and I might have called it, grading group 1, or I could even say discussion group A, discussion group B, that kind of thing. And once I start typing, it's just going to automatically populate. I can also look for specific names here. So, sorry, I've got this obnoxious Google prompt thing that's happening here, so you can't actually see what's loading underneath, but that is available for you there as well. You'll just need to start typing in those names. And this is really helpful if you have maybe just a couple students that perhaps missed a class and you need them to catch up or something like that. You could assign this to just 1 or 2 students. So that individually assign icon is just a really fantastic way of getting that really personalized learning happening in your classroom. And it can also happen asynchronously. So you do not need everything to all take place in one go while you're staring at your students face to face. This is a great way to push out information to students who actually need it. That second step along is going to be your option to align learning objectives. And here, I believe that you will find under your custom learning objectives, you're going to have some that have been created from KIPP already. I'm sorry, not KIPP, Yes Prep, my Freudian slip from my time at KIPP. And within this space, you'll go ahead and see things like, under my personal space, I went ahead and created some character growth traits. You may have different custom learning objectives under the school section here for your usage as well. So you could go in and attach as many of these as you would want. And adding those learning objectives will mean that this specific assignment is also going to track in your mastery tab. So now my students who respond to this, depending on what their score is, they're also going to have that score pushed over to these different learning objectives. I'll show you how that works within a rubric as well. That second option over is your choice to lock this. So let's say you really don't want any students to be able to comment after the due date. I've said that this is due at 9:23, and maybe I make it due at the end of the school day, which could be 3 or 4, depending. And then I'll go ahead and lock it on the due date itself. So on 9:23, I'm going to lock it. I'll give them until midnight. So they can turn it in late. I'm going to deduct points, but they can turn it in for the rest of the day, not just the end of the school day itself. Otherwise, I can just go ahead and leave it unlocked. Or if I come into this discussion later, I can always decide, oh, well, I'm done with this discussion now. I don't want students commenting on it. I'm just going to go ahead and lock it now, just by editing that. Again, you do have this option to publish this to students. So if you're not ready for them to be actually engaged in this just yet, well, you can go ahead and hide it, make it unpublished. And then that next option over is the option to make students require to post before they see each other's responses. So the scenario I was talking about before, how I said, well, maybe I have a student who this question is like, include a piece of textual evidence. Well, I definitely don't want my students looking at each other's responses because, well, then they're all going to come up with exactly the same piece of textual evidence because they'll just copy one another. So in that scenario, I'm going to go ahead and click this icon that I just made sort of light up with colors. And now when my students come into the discussion itself, they're not going to be able to see each other's responses. All they're going to see is this other student's names, and they'll see it with their comment underneath that's just grayed out. Now, once they do respond, they'll then be able to go in and actually read one another's responses. So at that stage, you can continue to have this sort of engaged back and forth dynamic with your students. They could comment, and then once they have submitted the comment, they'd then be allowed to go ahead and read each other's. So then it becomes a really cool kind of peer community feel that they're actually talking to each other here and engaging in one another's work. Then lastly, I do have the option to share a discussion. I haven't clicked enable grading, I kind of unclicked it there. But you can share a discussion if it is not graded by just clicking this little constellation icon. And this is a cool option if you ever have a scenario where you have two different courses that are being taught and you want students to kind of work together. So you could even potentially, as this rolls out to potentially more of your schools, you could actually have a discussion that goes on between like high school and a middle school, for example. You would just need to become a course administrator in the other course. And then it's a really cool way to create a bit of a community understanding where you'd have your comments in your students in your 9th grade classes, they were sort of mentoring a 4th grade class, that kind of thing, and they were having a conversation between those different classes across schools. So it's still a great way to share a discussion out. Really, really helpful for any scenarios like that. You can also share it between different courses if you're trying to get that interdisciplinary piece in. Really helpful to be able to share that into a different course too. Now, once you select enable grading, that is not going to be the case. So the grading does need to be set up, selected to your grade setup within the course itself. So for that reason, it will disappear when you do create that enable grading icon. And lastly, I do have the option to copy this over to another course. So if I'm having the same discussion in multiple sections of the same course, I'll just go ahead and copy it over. And once I'm happy with the way this has been set up, I'm going to go ahead and create it. And now as an example, I would love for you to all go ahead and jump into your own student version of this. And you can go ahead and comment on that introductory discussion. Now from the student side, I'm just going to jump into my fake student account, and I'm going to comment on this as well. Said no student ever. Your student here can go ahead and insert content directly in the discussion space too. So if they want to use things like links or symbols, or if you're asking them to build out equations, they can do that here. They can also do a audio or video recording prompt. So as a student, this might be a cool way to actually get students talking to each other without necessarily having them all in the same space. Discussions are often used asynchronously. So instead of having your student just type in a response, if you do want it to be more about them getting to know each other, you can go ahead and click that audio video recording. And eventually you could even select the video prompt. And this is a bit of a pain, there are so many things to allow. But you could go ahead and actually take a recording of yourself sharing the same information with each other. And now once I'm ready, I'll go ahead and post that. And from the teacher side, now I have at least one response. I can show you what it looks like to grade this. It's going to look a lot more interesting, obviously, once you have a bunch of different responses. But you can see that here I already see I've got an unread post in this discussion. And I actually just got a notification on my phone as well, on which I have the app set up. And that's telling me Christina Yang just commented on your course discussion thread in this class, and it tells me what she's written. So I'm going to jump into that piece. And you're going to see that it's showing me that it's unread. That's what the orange line on the far right-hand side means. This is the first time I visited this page since Christina has commented on here. So I am going to go ahead and look directly for anything with the orange line to make sure I'm giving a comment. I can either like or reply to this. So my students might be replying to one another's posts. And then once I'm happy with that, I can go ahead and actually grade it. And to do that, again, I'm going to look for the little orange button. So there's a little icon next to any of the posts that I have not yet graded. I'll just click on the notepad icon. And remember, I set this up numerically out of 100, so I didn't attach a scale to it or anything. So I'm just going to go ahead and give it a grade. And remember, this comment that I put in here, this is going to show up in my student's gradebook, as long as I select Show to Student. So there might be a reason, maybe I'm kind of getting a good idea of how my students are faring in terms of writing, and maybe I'm trying to just get a quick feed from my students to check sort of where they are in terms of written discussion posts. I might want to write my own response that's really private, so it's not meant for the students or the parents to see, in which case I could write like, help Christina with so-and-so syntax, grammar, whatever it happens to be, and I'm just going to check that don't show to student. So then it's just a comment for me in my gradebook for personal usage. Otherwise, when it's kind of feedback, I can go ahead and use that there, or I could have replied more publicly here. And once I've submitted the grade, you'll see it has a little check mark, but I can always click on it again and go back in and edit the grade if I need to. One really helpful thing about this screen is that when you do select Highlight User, you're going to see who has not yet submitted to this course. So no one is currently in this course just yet, but you'll need to go ahead and join this course to be able to post in the discussion. And then I'd be able to see who all of the other people within the course are that have not yet posted any responses. So really helpful way to actually get involved in terms of, especially if you are using this in a classroom, in terms of just tracking and checking for understanding. If you're looking at your highlight user post and you're seeing 3 of your students out of 20 haven't yet commented, well, you know who the students that you need to support are. You can go directly to them and help them out. And that about wraps up your discussion piece. So the next thing we're going to jump into is creating an assignment. I'll go ahead and click on that assignment on that green button again, the green dotted line, and I'll click Add Assignment. And this is pretty similar in the way that you set it up, but this is for a very different purpose. Discussions are always going to be public. Your students are going to eventually be able to see one another's responses. If you wanted to go in and say, well, let me just change this around and I don't want actually people to see each other's work, well, this is when you would want to create an assignment. So maybe I'm going to do this assignment as something like my final project. In the description, I'll put all the information I need. Maybe I'm attaching a YouTube video about the Tudors or about Elizabeth I, that kind of thing. So watch the video, submit your final project on 1 year of Elizabeth I's life. That kind of thing, whatever you want to set this out as. You might write something like use MLA formatting. You might make sure that your students are using textual evidence. And maybe you do want them to submit via Google Drive. Maybe you want them to submit through a Word document that they upload. Maybe you want them to actually include multimedia. So you need them to be including links and images to various things. It's always your choice. So you can go ahead and create that sort of thing. Again, all the same options that we had previously. Remember, when you upload that video, if you're worried it's not working, go ahead and just click the landscape icon in the top left-hand corner, and you can preview the video directly from this page. And actually, this is always a really good check. Playback has been disabled on other websites by this video's owner. So this would not be a video that I would actually want to post directly in this page. I would go in and change that. I won't do that for time's sake right now. But once you preview that, it's a really good check because you don't want your students coming into this page and trying to click the video and then they can't actually see it. Again, I'll set up that due date. I want my students to be reminded of this final project. It's important. I do not want them missing this due date. I'll put it into a category. This is probably going to be something like coursework. And then instead of using a scale this time, I'm actually going to create a rubric. And I'll speed through this, but The rubrics are a really fantastic thing to play with. I highly encourage you to start trying to use this in a few different ways. I can go ahead and make a specific rubric just for this purpose if I want to, or I could have attached a rubric I'd already created. And you may be sharing rubrics with one another as teachers as well. You could have, one person in charge of creating all of the English rubrics and then sharing that with everyone. There might be really specific rubrics that the school, the network is asking you to use. You can upload those directly in here and kind of revisit them at any time you need. And to start with, I might make, a specific sort of prompt like timeliness. When did you turn this project in? And I'm giving them, 2 points for turning it in early, 1 point for turning it on time, and no points for turning it in late, that kind of thing. And I can change my setup here. Now I'm going to go ahead and put in some learning objectives specifically. So I don't want to change my grading scale on the right-hand side here just yet, because for your purposes, for your ease, everything you put into this top bar, that's going to be duplicated on all of the other learning objectives that you next create. So I'll go ahead and select learning objectives from my personal space. And maybe I also want to put in some Common Core objectives. And then now within this space, I can go ahead and alter anything I need. So I'm only going to have 3 options here. I'm going to have 2, 1, and 0. 0 was late. 1 was on time, and 2 points if they turn this in early. Otherwise, everything else is set up by the normal Common Core scale that we've put into place. You could actually apply your own grading scale as well. Now, I currently don't have a points-based scale in this gradebook setup, but if you did have your own gradebook setup, your scale, you would then be able to go ahead and add in that points-based scale. So if you don't use these kind of terms like excellent, good, satisfactory, needs improvement, you could go ahead and pull in any scale that was created for you by YesPrep already. And so this is out of a total of 10 points. I could go ahead and add in one more criteria for something like extra credit. If I wanted to do that, the easiest way for me, in my own personal opinion, is that you just make it out of one area. You make it out of 0. And I'll just describe this as up to 5 points. And maybe I'm telling my students specific needs that I'm going to have for the extra credit piece. So if they do this, this, and this, then they could get up to 5 extra points of credit. Now you'll notice the rubric, that's still worth 10 points altogether. I have not changed the overall score of the rubric. But if I need to go ahead and add extra credit, I have the space to do so. And in here, I could just go ahead and override my final score. It's still out of 10. I can put in points here, and it will round this up past 10. Won't give you any error messages or anything like that. Once I create that rubric, I've actually decided to show it to my students. I always recommend that. Within the assignment itself, your students are going to see what your expectations are for them. Then a lot of the same options here, individually assign, still the same. The lock is still the same. The publish is still the same. And copy to courses, also the same for you. You now won't be able to add learning objectives on this place because I've already added my learning objectives into my rubric. So you'll see that they're already attached. I do not need to double up on that. That's done. I can go in and decide whether I want this to be a submitting project, or maybe I want to disable the submissions. So let's say my students are doing a Socratic seminar in class, and I'm going to be grading them out of 100 points. And I want them to know everything that they need to be prepared to actually demonstrate during that class. But I'm not actually going to ask them to submit anything. I'm going to be grading them on it, but I don't need them to turn in a paper or anything like that. And in that scenario, I just want to go ahead and turn off my submissions. Also helpful for anything like arts that happen to be some sort of presentation or performance. Good for different scenarios in which you're having a student turn in something on paper, any kind of pen or paper. You still want them to know what the expectations are, and you want them to be able to see their grade really clearly attached to a rubric, but you don't actually need them to submit. But now I will submit. Your grade statistics are a slightly different option for your students. So if they do want to go in and see if you want them to go in and be able to see how they're doing in comparison to the rest of their students in their class, you can go ahead and enable your grade statistics. Now, we know that's a sensitive area. You might not want your students comparing themselves to one another in the class. So for that reason, you can leave that as the default, which is disabled. Just so you know, it will show anonymously, so you're not actually going to see any other student names as a student, but you'll see sort of a little charted where everyone is. Sometimes good for motivation. And then this option to enable or disable comments is just because occasionally students try to comment on an assignment instead of submitting something to the assignment. So you have the option to turn that off if you need. And I'm going to create that assignment. And once more, as my student now, once this is created, I'm going to go ahead and submit something. So in my fake student account, the very first option is now my final project. And I can see that I've got this video to play, and we'll pretend like it would play in this place. And then I can go ahead and check out the expectations. So I know I have to use MLA formatting. Maybe that's on my rubric. I know I have to use textual evidence and multimedia. So I'm going to submit an assignment on the far right-hand side, not comment on it, but submit an assignment. And maybe I've written up this assignment in a Word document. I could just click File, and I'd be able to just grab that Word document that I have on my hard drive and submit it really straightforward. I can also give feedback. And maybe I need a little support. I'm kind of just sending some information to my teacher. Now, if I'm continuing to revise my project, I can go ahead and just resubmit this final project. And it's telling me in the top right-hand corner that as a student, I'm on revision 2. And now from here, if I want to, I can actually do an audio-video recording from this place. Really, really helpful for any scenario for language teachers if you're having students submit some kind of translation. Maybe you have a project where you're asking students to go out and interview someone that inspires them, something like that. They could make a video recording or an audio recording. Lots of different options around that. Your Create tab is that second option over. I asked my students to submit some multimedia. So for that reason, I'm probably going to have my student do some kind of submission. And I'm going to have them create a link here as well. And maybe I'm having them insert some imagery too. So exactly as you have been able to do as the teacher, my student now has the option to do the same thing. They can use all of the rich text editor icons to their own advantage here. And I don't have to go ahead and submit straight away. I do have the option to save this draft. So if I want to continue working on it, it will just save for me in this space. And once I'm ready, I'll submit that. Then lastly, in your resources space, this is where you'll have access as a student to your own Google Drive as well. Now, this is important to notice is that when you do go ahead and decide which document you want to submit from your drive, your only option is to import this as a file. And that means that it's a static version of that Google Drive document. So your student, even if they go in afterwards and they change this, they make some edits, they fix something, they add extra textual evidence, the copy that is being submitted right now is a static version of what that document looks like right now. So I'll click Import File. And now even if I go into this Google document and I change it afterwards, it's still going to be the initial version that happened at this time at 10:09 a.m. That is the exact time that it's being turned in. Now, if you want a Google document to be turned in as more of kind of a live document, the better way to do that is to select Create. And in your Insert Content icon, you'll still have the option to pull in from your drive. So that same thing that I would just pull in my apps, I'm going to import this link instead. And now I'm importing a version of it that is live, and my teachers can go in and click on the link. It's going to take them right to the Google document, and they're going to see that live document that's being worked on now. So that's a cool way to enable any kind of live editing that you want to happen in the classroom. And so back from the teacher side, I'll go ahead and look at anything that's been submitted. Now you can see so far I have my students that have submitted. If I was looking to see who had not yet submitted, I would be able to go into Not Yet Submitted, and that would be the place that I can go and check out who is doing this and who isn't. And when I'm ready to grade, I'll just select that icon that will show me the revision, and it's going to automatically show me the last revision that was turned in. If I'm looking for the earlier revisions, you can see each of them are time-stamped. I can just toggle between them in the top left-hand corner, looking for each of the different revisions and see how different they all look. And now this document viewer has a ton of options for you. I've been told more often than not that teachers really like using the annotation piece on the app rather than on the desktop. It does work on the desktop as well, of course, but it's just easier to use with a stylus. You can go ahead and highlight sections. You can comment on different areas. You can strike out areas that you think should be taken out. And you can actually annotate directly onto this piece as well. So especially helpful if you're looking at different working for math or science, that kind of thing. You know, here's where the mistake in the work happened, that kind of thing, just by using that. And I'll save those changes. When I'm ready to actually grade the item, the top right-hand corner is showing me that little rubric icon. So that means when I click on the grades, all I need to do is that this is thrown in, immediately here. Now it's before the due date, so I've turned it in early. I'll give them 2 points. All I need to do is just click on the different criteria. Now let's say I want to give it extra credit. Here's where I can go ahead and put in an extra 3 points of credit. And you'll see that it's overridden here on the bottom. So maybe I'm giving it extra credit for helping others. So Christina finished her work in early, she submitted it, and then she helped other students. And I've given her a little comment on this specific area. So really specific feedback on each criteria is possible here as well. And my student gets to see the rubric once it's been marked up. So they are getting incredibly targeted information about specific objectives you're having them work on. I'll hit save when I'm ready for that grade. And now Christina will have been told that a grade from the student side, a grade has been posted for her project. In the teacher side, lastly, I do have the option to go ahead and respond to any of the dialogue happening over here on the far right. So I can open up and say, great start, MLA formatting is off, check out the doc below for help. And I can go ahead and attach a document that I know is going to be helpful for her. So there I've attached, my pretend version of an MLA formatting document so she can actually reference it to help her with her work. Alternatively, if I do want to give some kind of conferencing or verbal feedback, I know I never had time to do enough conferencing in my classroom, I can go ahead and click the microphone icon and I can give her verbal feedback instead. You can always go ahead and record yourself giving like a video high five, something like that if your student gets a high score. I've seen some very imaginative ways of using that too. So definitely encourage you to start playing with that microphone icon there too. It's a really awesome feature. And that about wraps up the assignment workflow. So that was both the student workflow going through this piece, and then also the teacher workflow going through getting that submission and actually grading it and giving feedback there too. So we worked through those different interactive discussions. One thing to mention is that you do have the option to moderate discussions. So within that discussion space itself, you might remember that as I was posting all of those pieces in my discussion here, you might have noticed that my students are just going to be able to comment on this space. Now, if at the beginning of the year you're a little bit concerned about like discussion norms and students saying things inappropriately, you can opt to moderate your discussions. And the way you would do that would be to click Course Options. And from your drop-down, you're going to find the space to click Moderate Posts. And that is a fantastic option if you're worried that your students are going to be checking work and putting in things that maybe don't quite meet your discussion norms themselves at the beginning of the year. I do warn you that this becomes a lot of work pretty quickly. So you are going to be needing to either allow or delete any discussion posts that are submitted. So you are going to get a kind of a barrage of emails and information to just make sure that you're moderating each and every post that is put in there. But it is helpful if you're worried about that at the beginning of the year. So you just enable moderation here. In terms of the appropriate feature as well, you can, and you probably have already set up a word filter. So specific words are going to be looked for within the website itself. If a student posts that, it could be replaced, or you can just replace it with asterisks and that kind of thing. Otherwise, you do always have the option to see anything that's been deleted. So your recycle bin holds everything and anything that has been put onto this Schoology course, even if it has been deleted. So a good sort of life lesson for your students in that nothing ever really disappears from the internet. But if you are worried that students are kind of posting something rude or offensive or silly in one space and then immediately deleting it, well, you're still going to be able to see it within the recycle bin too. All right, so that's enough of that kind of discipline piece. We've talked through our different materials. We aren't talking through tests and quizzes today in our Getting Started course. We don't cover that. If you do need some overview about that, I highly recommend you go ahead and visit the Schoology course help center. We do have an amazing description directly there to show you how to do all of the different question types, attach learning objectives, and then set up all those settings correctly. There are a lot of choices there. But I find it pretty intuitive. So once you get used to it, it's pretty awesome. So just revisiting we're going to our agenda. We're going to get to our grading piece in just a minute in this second recording that I make here. A couple advanced features you may not have had a chance to play with. On that same place where I showed you to view, to go in and moderate your discussions or any posts, you can go ahead and click Course Options, which sits directly underneath the profile picture for your course. And that very first option is the choice to view the course as someone else. So once you have students in your course, if you're not sure exactly what they're going to be seeing as a student, you can go ahead and view your course as one of your students. Furthermore, if there's a parent attached to that student, you can go ahead and see what your parent would see as well. So really great way to make sure that, if you're publishing things, you're not sure how it's going to look for your students, you can just jump in from the student view itself and see what they see. Another option in this same course options menu is that you do also have the choice to go ahead and click Edit Privacy or Course Settings. And this is really helpful if you're ever worried that you need to kind of make things slightly more private, or if you need to change the permissions that your students in the course have. Now, currently, my students are able to go in and edit their own discussion responses after they've posted. Now, you may have thought of this when we were talking through the discussion. What if, you have a question where you're asking students to find a piece of textual evidence, and you're worried that they're just going to look at each other's textual evidence after they've posted and then change their initial response. They could post something, that's like a sentence long and it doesn't really have any evidence in it, and look at each other's and copy that. Well, you can go ahead and turn off the option for your students to be able to edit their own discussion responses, just by making only group administrators able to do that. Further down, you do have the option to change any of your parent or visitor settings. If you don't want them to see too much information, you can just hide some of the different pieces from them. And if you want your students to land on the updates page instead of the materials page, this very last option has that choice for you. Then last but not least, I did just want to show you very briefly your resource collections themselves as well. So within your own personal space, this is where all of your resources live. So anything that I have created, anything that maybe I have a whole course, like the course that I was working on today, I can go ahead and save it into my resources. And that means that later on, when I am recreating this course for another purpose, maybe next year, that kind of thing, I have full access to all of the different work that I've created and simply saved in my resource space. So this is really helpful to be able to sort of keep track of all of the different work that you're creating. If you want to go ahead and share different information with other people, I recommend that you go ahead and create a collection. And that gives you the option to share this out with others. So that little sharing icon will allow you to add anyone within your school. So if you're working with, one other specific teacher, perhaps you're, more of an instructional coach position in this school, and you want to be able to share some information and materials with some of the people that you're working with, you can go ahead and just share a collection out. Much easier to be able to just send people things rather than having to, attach it into an email or anything like that. Just a lot more kind of an easy, quick process. And you don't have to do it more than once. This collection is permanently shared with that person you shared it with. Then further down, you're also going to see the space where you can add your own learning objectives. So we talked about that previously, about actually creating your own custom learning objectives. Perhaps there's something in your class that it makes sense to create a learning objective for. Maybe you have a slightly different classroom setup or a workflow. You might want to create some custom learning objectives just for your students. And you can put those into this learning objective space. And every time you create an assignment or a discussion or a test, you can attach your own personal learning objectives to that. You're also going to find the public resource space here, and I recommend you take a little poke around that. It's pretty intuitive in terms of the way that you would find information. When you find something you want, you'll just select the little add icon with the what looks like sort of Polaroids on the right-hand side. And lastly, your apps are all within that app section on the bottom left. So go ahead and install any apps that you currently use. If you're big Google users, install that. You can install OneDrive, Dropbox, Vimeo, YouTube, Evernote, all of that good stuff. And then all of your resources are going to sit directly within this space. It is not sorted in exactly the same way that your own Google Drive is sorted. It is sorted by most recently accessed. And so for that reason, it is often helpful, especially for students. You work on something in Drive, you're probably going to be using that first in Schoology as well, the most recent thing you're accessing. Otherwise, you can always just hit Command F to go ahead and look for specific words within this space, and that will help you just do that little finding process. But otherwise, I recommend you use folders as much as possible to make this a really easy and quick search process. And that about wraps up what we have today in terms of that second section of getting started. So I won't bore you with the agenda again. But I do want to show you just a couple pieces that I do have for you. At the bottom of this page, you're going to see two different folders. I'll make them nicely color-coded so you can see them. You can see the Schoology resources page. I highly recommend taking a look at that if you're looking for the support home, so the help center that I've been talking about the whole time. This is where you can find all that information, a link directly to that. Also a link to our Schoology blog, which is a really awesome space. We have a lot of innovative use cases there. We have different exciting news that's coming out from Schoology. You can find that all there. Your quick reference guides are sort of like cards to be able to see how to create these different pieces if you ever get stuck. And the tutorials are also really helpful. So we did not do tests and quizzes today. You can go in and say how to create tests and quizzes and how to use online tests and quizzes here as well. So I recommend you check that out if you need a little bit more help around that. And then this building content in Schoology. This is your option to just get a little bit more inspiration. I have some choices of how you might choose to set up your materials and your folders, and then a really good example of some exciting pages in there too. So I'll make you course administrators once you've done the work in this course itself, and then you'll be able to just click the gear icon on the far right-hand side, excuse me, and save these folders into your resource space itself. So then you'll have access to them whenever you need to get to it. Really helpful if you have, a new teacher or an assistant come in, that kind of thing, and you want to give them a little bit of extra help. You can just grab it directly from your resources. So you won't be able to click this gear icon and save to resources until I've made you an admin. So once you are in my course, I'll be able to go into my members group and change you to being a course administrator. So there's no one in it just yet, but once you guys join, if you'd like to be an admin, just shoot me a message. You can just type in my name, or you can message me directly from this page here, and you can send me a direct message. Please do go ahead and post questions that have come up. So in the top materials space, you're going to see that I still do have this parking lot. I encourage you to post any questions that you have here. Our next session is going to be about grading. So please do go ahead and listen to both, and then let me know what I can do to help. All right, thank you all so much for your engagement, and enjoy the rest of your days. Bye-bye.